Hello, I'm Dr. David Ermer. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatry and also the clinical vice president of behavioral health at Avera. Today, I would like to discuss child development, but I've already had a previous topic on early child development from preschool to pre-adolescent. Today, I'm going to tackle the subject of early adolescence to adulthood, which can be again, there's dramatic changes that occur during this period of time. I would like to preface it by saying I give fairly general descriptions of development, knowing that everybody develops a little bit differently. And so these are sort of averages and generalizations. I would argue that nobody follows the norm. Everybody's a little bit different than the normal curve. And so don't be concerned if your middle school child hasn't hit puberty yet and their friend down the street's already shaving. That's fairly normal. That's why I strongly recommend going in for well child visits to make sure that a professional can just take a look to make sure everything's going okay. But there's a high variability, especially in physical development during adolescence. As far as cognitive development in adolescence, big changes during adolescence. They go from fairly simplistic view of the world to early adulthood is really being able to take a look at the world through a real sort of a critical lens, so to speak. Formal operations mean they can, the precursors are in early adolescence and starts to develop more into middle and late adolescence and then into adulthood. Unfortunately, there are some theories that some adults never do reach the epitome of formal operations, but that's kind of the end point for most. Examples of formal operational thinking include thinking hypothetically. They can think about an action and thoughts and then in their brain, without experiencing them, come up with a consequence without actually experiencing this. And grade school kids can't do that. They can consider a number of possibilities and plan their behavior accordingly. They can think logically. They can identify and reject hypotheses or possible outcomes based on logic. They can think abstractly. They can think about their own thoughts. It leads to introspection, self-analysis. It also can lead to what some psychologists have called existential angst. They start thinking, about the universe and their role in the universe and what's the meaning of life, and all these really heavy topics can be a fairly common developmental issue in adolescence, and it can lead to some concern on adolescents' part, and that's where it's great to have a place for adolescents to speak openly about some of these concerns. They're able to have insight and perspective taking. They hopefully by the time they're 18 can take other people's point of view and these are the precursors obviously to things like empathy. They can understand others' perspectives and understand why they feel the way they do. They can also understand the perspectives of entire social systems. And again, they're learning more sophisticated ways to look at the world. Their moral compass should become more sophisticated as they get older also. They can problem solve better. They can attack a problem and consider multiple solutions and plan a course of action accordingly. Again, these are all skills that, from middle school to high school just gradually evolve as they get older. But cognitive development is uneven and impacted by emotionality. And again, adolescents might reach these points at different stages, and frankly, most of them don't hit these different cognitive milestones at the same time. So there will be differences amongst kids. Socially, that middle school age is real tough with parents. The kids think their parents are like probably the most uncool people in the world. They try to distance themselves from the parents. They definitely identify with the peer group to the exclusion of their family at times. And in fact, the influence of the social group is very large at this age. Social status is largely related to their group membership, and their identity is what clique or what group are they part of. And then their acceptance socially tends to depend on conformity to these traits or roles in that specific group. And they want to be independent from adults. They really, the epitome of this is the kid who wants to go with his friends to the movie, but wants the parents to drop them off 2 blocks away from the theater because they don't want to be seen with their parents. They just want to hang out with their friends. And because of that, I do think we always tell parents, really pay attention to who your child's hanging out with, because their behavior is going to conform to that social group throughout adolescence, and you really want them to be hanging around with good influences. In fact, I think a social worker from Harvard wrote a whole book describing how parents are irrelevant at this age, where your social group is much more relevant. And I think that's a little bit hyperbole. Parents are important, but that social group is so important that parents really need to keep track of who their kids are hanging out with. And then as they get older, it's a little less cliquish. Friendships are based on loyalty, understanding, choices about who to trust, respect and honesty and straightforwardness from adults. Unfortunately, kids need to be educated. Their morality is the golden rule as they get older. Conform with the law is necessary for a good society. Treat others as you would treat yourselves is the common rule. Emotionally, identity formation is a fancy term for adolescents spend their adolescence trying to figure out who they are, what is their identity, and this can be a fascinating journey. It can be kids will take a lot of twists and turns. Sometimes, the 12-year-old might be a football player, but then by the time they're 17, they really are interested in science and they want to be really go into the science field. So it's really about trying to figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you enjoy doing, and how you identify and who you feel you are. Young adults are incredibly self-conscious about everything, their body, their appearance. Their body image is rarely objective. They think negative thoughts because they just are very concerned about how they look and how they appear compared to others. They're obviously negatively affected by any abuse. They can be emotionally labile at that age. They can be very happy one moment and upset the next. And the emotional lability that doesn't last a long time is fairly normal and not of concern at this age. They definitely may overact to what us parents would consider a fairly simple question or criticism, like you missed a spot vacuuming or mowing the yard. They might blow up because they feel like parents are being unduly harsh on them. And then they definitely are looking for more intense emotional experiences. They start engaging in risky behaviors. They definitely can reject a parent. They give parents a hard time, for lack of better explanation, at this young age, and they rely on their peer group for more support. Middle adolescence is starting to grow out of that a little bit. They started looking at other people's values and beliefs. They look at the whole. They start getting a more positive self-image, but they are continuing to struggle with some of the identity formation, especially anybody who's a minority, biracial, adopted, or feel they're different than the average group that they hang out with. Physical growth spurts happen. We see that girls hit puberty earlier than boys. Youth have to learn to acclimate to their body changes, and this can be troubling at times. We do see that girls who develop earlier tend to struggle quite a bit. They might get teased by their classmates. Boys, the boys who hit puberty late are the ones who, as a general rule, tend to get teased because they're much smaller than their peers because they haven't hit puberty yet and they look quite a bit different. In that middle school, because of this, there's just a huge range of behaviors, and middle school is hard because you have fully developed girls, and you have boys who haven't even started puberty, and emotionally, there's kids into Pokemon and the kids who might be dating. So there's a full range of emotional, social, and physical characteristics in middle school that typically don't resolve till later in high school. Middle school, again, I'm going to look at movement towards independence. So middle schools students, again, are struggling with that sense of identity, who they are. They feel very awkward and don't really accept themselves. A lot of focus on themselves, high expectations. They want to be perfect at everything. And at the same time, they struggle with self-esteem. Their interest in clothing style are more influenced by their peer group than anybody else, especially parents' requests. They can be moody at times. They definitely can use speech better to express oneself. They start to realize in early middle school that parents aren't perfect. The grade school kids kind of feel that teachers and parents are this perfection and then they start identifying their parents' faults, and this can be hard for that relationship. They definitely are showing less overt affection towards their parents, and I think a lot of parents struggle with the fact that they used to be really close to their kids in grade school, and now their kids don't want anything to do with them, and they're wondering what happened. And it unfortunately can be a fairly typical part of development and usually resolves as they get older. Occasional rudeness occurs in middle school. Some people would say more than occasional rudeness. And then a lot of complaints about parents trying to set limits, interfering with their independence. We tell parents continue to set firm limits. You're in charge, and even if the kids push against that, it's very important that you continue to set limits. I saw a quote that was attributed to Mark Twain that kind of describes this movement towards independence and this whole kind of kids' view of their parents going from 14 to 21. And the quote goes like this. It says, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly stand to have the old man around. When I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years." And that's classic what we're talking about here. The kids just don't think their parents know anything. Middle school, as we get later in the talk, we'll realize that as the kids get older, they start realizing, hey, maybe their parents aren't quite as bad as they thought they were. Later middle school, frankly, South Dakota is, again, culturally, I mean, a lot of times learning to drive in some states where the driving age is 17, they're not doing this till they're juniors and seniors in high school. Literally late middle school, early high school in South Dakota, kids are learning to drive and share the family automobile. So there's this huge independent piece that goes with that. They can return to childish behaviors when stressed. So that's not unusual. That's not a loss of skill when we talk about developmental concerns. And they can be really resistant to parents' belief systems, whether it be cultural, religious, or other traditions. And this can be hard on parents who truly value their religious or cultural traditions. But they might, again, value more their peer group and their clique they're with at the younger age rather than value what their parents value. They definitely are interested in the presence early middle school. It's all about here and now with limited thoughts of the future. They do start to have more intellectual expansion, and they do have the greater ability to do work in early middle school. You might see kids wanting to mow neighbors' yards, babysit, help, maybe help other neighbors do things or help around the house for money. There is a concept called normal adolescent narcissism. We really see this where parents are concerned because their son or daughter is very self-centered. That's a fairly normal cognitive phase where they just are not really caring about anything but themselves. We reassure parents if they're not getting in trouble and they're doing well otherwise, they're going to grow out of this and hopefully have a very strong altruistic kind of care about the world attitude as they get older. So it's very common, and in fact, it's the norm to be rather narcissistic and self-centered in high school. Relationships in early high school can be hard. They're shy, they're very modest. Again, the girls develop earlier than boys. There's increased interest in dating, concerns with self-esteem, and worries about being normal. And a common way to tease other kids is to tease them about not being normal. And so that can, if you wanted to, the kids learn very quickly the way they tease anybody else is tease them. You pick the subject where, hey, you're not normal this way. Morals and values, they definitely have rules and limit testing. Abstract thought is starting to develop. They're all starting to understand the consequences of their future behavior. So that's important. They start to understand. Late high school and beyond, this is where things starting getting better in relationship with the family. There's increased independent functioning, better sense of identity. They're starting to figure out who they really are and what they want to do with their life. They are examining their inner experiences, their ability to think ideas through. Conflict with parents decreases, and if we have typical development, increased ability for delayed gratification and compromise, increased emotional stability, increased concern for others, increased self-reliance. All the things we talked about happening in middle school, these things all should start to resolve in late high school, and where you get somebody who's less narcissistic, more related, can relate better with their parents and actually understand their parents' point of view, frankly, and not totally fight them every step of the way, and not so dependent upon their peer group as much as their own concerns about the right and wrong way to act. As far as that delayed gratification, they've done experiments, and even in younger kids, where they've measured success in how long somebody who can tolerate delayed gratification. For instance, they did a test where somebody got one reward now, but if they waited a certain amount of time, like 5 minutes, they'd get, like, let's say 2 cookies or 2 marshmallows. They found that the kids who could wait the 5 minutes were able to do well. So being able to delay gratification is a positive skill to say, hey, I can wait and have a better reward. Individuals who can't do that do struggle with school and life in general as they get older. Peer relationships continue to remain very important, but take an appropriate place. It's not everything at this age. They're important, but there's other parts of their lives. There's maybe activities at high school. There's their family. They have firmer religious and cultural belief system, which may concur with their parents. It may not, and that can be a struggle for parents who maybe adhere to a real a cultural religious belief, and the kids have different beliefs, and that can be a struggle at this age. Work habits become more defined. They start becoming, again, they're more self-reliant. They can take care of their work schedule on their own without parent support. Again, they have the increased concern for a future and life beyond high school. And then more importance is placed on one's role in life. In other words, they're very concerned about how they fit in, what they're going to do with their life, and that's less concerned about what their peer group's doing, which is a very positive change. They can start having more deeper relationships, more feeling of love, more adult style relationships with others, and that firmer sense of identity. They have a greater capacity for setting goals, greater capacity to use their insight as far as goals. They start to have a rational view of what they're good at and what not good at, and know that, hey, I'm not very good at this area, so this my goal may be different than every 5th grade boy who's going to be quarterback for the Vikings. They realize, hey, I'm not maybe athletic enough to do that. And it's not because they have low self-esteem. They just realize, hey, this isn't my skill set. They, again, have emphasis on personal dignity, self-esteem. And then some of the family, social, and cultural traditions that they used to back away from when they're younger can actually regain some of their previous importance, which they kind of come around full circle from when they were middle schoolers. Developmental and behavior concerns, the list could be quite long. As you mentioned earlier, adolescents are risk takers. And unfortunately, most brains don't fully develop until you're around 24 years of age. And the last part of the brain to develop is that frontal lobe, which helps with impulse control, problem solving, and thinking through behavior before acting. And so it's kind of a curse, but we have neurobiologic reasons why people engage in high-risk behavior, and alcohol and drug use is one of them. The good news is actually the numbers look a little bit better. They're down. Alcohol and drug use is down from about 4 years ago. About 45% of high school seniors have tried alcohol. About 11% of 8th graders have tried alcohol last year. As far as vaping, about 11% of 8th graders vaped. About 23% of high school seniors vaped. Marijuana use is about 29% for seniors and 8% for 8th graders. Still too high because no drug or alcohol is safe. There's this, I think, adolescents are misinformed. They think vaping is safe and that marijuana use is safe. Neither are safe and come with a lot of concern. So again, it's very useful to monitor kids' behaviors. The good news is, again, we've seen a little bit of decrease in drug and alcohol use. Mood swings are a concern. If they have dramatic mood swings where literally they are a different person from day to day, it may be worth seeking professional help. They could have, we start seeing depression numbers increase at this age group, and that's a concern. We see around 15% of adolescents may develop some form of depression, and it may be worth getting a professional assessment. High-risk behaviors are always a concern, and we do see adolescents engage in very high-risk behaviors. Again, part of it's neural development where that part of the brain isn't fully developed, but it's good to monitor your kids' behaviors. And ups and downs at school can be a concern. If all of a sudden they have good grades one semester and bad grades the next semester, you kind of have to start wondering what's going on, or do they have a mood disorder? Are they using drugs? Are they hanging out with the wrong crowd? Electronics usage deserves, all these topics we're discussing probably deserve a talk of their own, but too much electronics usage can be of great concern. We see kids who spend hours on electronics. They have a term, they use radicalized, but these kids get so locked into a certain topic, they can almost just almost obsess about a topic, and they use the term radicalized. It's not the same thing as religious radicalization, but they might go down a certain path on the internet and really get locked with a kind of a fringe group of people. So it's very important to monitor not only how much time your children and adolescents spend on electronics, but what they're looking at, because what they're looking at is very important, and what information are they getting. With the internet and with I believe 95 or 95% of adolescents have access to smartphones, so you can't control what's coming into your house that easily. I would say that most families, an appropriate rule would be that you can't have your device in your bedroom. It's got to stay in a common area, and there's a certain time where you can't use it anymore, because it can start to affect sleep. And we already know that adolescents, studies have shown that adolescents aren't getting enough sleep anyway. If a child's a lot of conduct problems, omitting facts, lying, stealing, these kind of behaviors, those are concerning. Abnormal eating patterns, these are a topic that things like anorexia and bulimia deserve a session of their own. But if they're starting to obsess about their appearance and starting to not eat or over-exercise, then you're concerned, or if they're making themselves throw up. I would say just being concerned about their weight. Unfortunately, because of electronic usage in the media, everybody thinks they should look perfect, but the majority of high school students feel they're overweight, even if they're not. And that's sad, because I think they're getting a lot of bad messages from social media, from celebrities and media, that they want to aspire to this perfect view, which is not perfect at all. So we do know that the majority of people don't like how much they weigh or how they appear. But the majority of people also don't engage in abnormal eating patterns. If you see abnormal eating patterns, definitely seek out some help or support, or at least an assessment, to make sure that there's an intervention isn't necessary. Obviously, any inappropriate public behavior, getting in fights, exposing themselves, can be a concern. If all of a sudden either they've always had limited peer connections, or they've pulled away from peers, these can be things like maybe they are depressed, or maybe they have social anxiety, or maybe they have autism that's not been a mild form of autism, where they just don't like having peer connections. Self-harm or suicidal statements are very concerning at this age. We've tried to educate everybody that if you have an adolescent making a self-harm statement, don't ignore it. Try to seek help. Try to make sure that you're getting support for those. We do know that death in adolescence is extremely rare, but unfortunately, suicide is one of the leading causes of death. Again, this is a topic that deserves at least a long talk by itself. But we do know that boys die by suicide much at higher rates than girls, mainly because of the means used. Boys tend to use handguns, and so from a safety point of view, we tell families, if you have handguns or guns, keep them locked up, because most suicidal thoughts and intents are very time limited. So if they don't have access to a gun during that short period of time where they're suicidal, you might save their life. Whereas if they do have access to a gun, it could have terrible adverse consequences. So we always try to educate people to keep, especially firearms, locked up, and also keep track of any other dangerous things in the house. If they need constant supervision, they can't function independently, that's a concern during adolescence. And then any sort of threatening behavior towards family or others is always a very concerning behavior. And that's just kind of the high points of concerning behaviors. Anytime you, teachers, coaches, or friends have concerns about the emotional well-being or any developmental issues with adolescents, it's worth getting assessed by a professional. Worst case scenarios, they say everything's fine and there's nothing to do about it. But if they are best case scenarios, they say everything's fine. Worst case scenarios, they may say, hey, I am seeing something like depression, and these are some maybe therapy is in order, or maybe we picked on some drug use that wasn't there before. So I do feel that don't ignore it if you feel like your adolescent's struggling, or other people have come to you with concerns about your adolescent. Thank you so much for your time. If you do have questions or concerns, you can call Behavioral Health at the number on the slide, but I really appreciate your time with this topic.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us with the Family Forum series. And we thank Avera for their partnership with the Sioux Falls School District and helping us make this possible to help to support our families. and to be able to bring information to you each month that will help you as a family in participation with our schools. Last month we started out with a new section that we classified as Is My Child Normal? And really it's just kind of a comical way to say there's going to be changes that happen with your children as you go through the elementary ages and the middle school and high school. Well, last month was really on the elementary age child and really for those families. This month we're going to focus much more so on the middle school and high school. And we have two individuals that are here with us this evening to help us to join on those conversations. So I'll let them introduce themselves and we'll start in on tonight's topic.
My name's Alex Dobbs. I'm a counselor at Memorial Middle School. And this is my 19th year as a middle school counselor and just happy to join you guys today.
I'm Katie Hevlin. I'm the Dean of Students at Roosevelt High School. I've been at Roosevelt for 17 years and was previously a school counselor there before starting my role as a Dean of Students.
Thank you both for joining us, and we're going to get started right away and talk about the middle school to start with. So, Alex, some of those things that you really see that parents have concerns with as their kid enters the middle school, what are some of those normal things that you hear that parents are really worried about?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just the transition with connecting with other students. So it can be kind of a sense of insecurity sometimes when you're going from the elementary where you know your classmates and you're kind of jumping into a pool of other sixth graders that maybe you don't know as well. So I think there's that concern about like fitting in and having connections. I think there's concerns about sometimes like just the logistics of like, are they going to know their schedule? Are they going to get lost? Are they going to be able to open a locker? Just some of those basic things that I think that they get a little concerned about. And I think also sometimes that transition between like, having a primary teacher in elementary where a lot of your communication is going with that primary teacher to communicating with a variety of teachers. And that adjustment for students too of like, I've got to kind of figure out the expectations of this variety of teachers and how do I work best in their class.
Yeah.
So.
How about at the high school level? Because obviously then they go through that same type of a transition from the 8th grade into the 9th grade.
Yeah, so high school is very similar with some of those things that worried about coming and meeting new people. What does those friends look like? We get a lot of concerns too about the classes they're choosing. Parents are starting to think about what that next step is, even though it's 4 years off. And so are the classes appropriate? Are they struggling? We'll hear things about just completing work and being ready for that next stage.
Yeah. We hear some about the social emotional changes or just some of those changes in the emotions of the kids, and especially when we talk about just their maturity levels. Do we see some of those same things that you see significant changes on that parents sometimes wonder, is this truly my kid?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, it's so much change that happens as a kid comes in from elementary to middle school to leaving for high school. Like a lot of times they've grown 12 inches, and just the voices have dropped a little bit for the guys and just the physical changes. But I think also like in middle school that's kind of exciting in some ways is like their perspective taking skills and being able to see things from a variety of angles, yet at the same time learning how to kind of manage emotions that are coming up too. It can be kind of a challenge.
And I think as they come to high school, they're growing and they're becoming an adult now. And so some of those things about being independent, the worry, sometimes sadness with what's happening and what that next step looks like, nervousness, stress, we see those things throughout the high school career.
What are some things that you wish parents knew about their middle school, especially those that are going through it for the very first time? The first time we had our daughter, who was the oldest, go into the middle school, it's just a little scary. So what are some of those things that if you were able to give advice and some information to a child coming up into the middle school or then into the high school, what were some things you would want them to know?
Sometimes we want to kind of paint a picture of like, it's all going to be just great. And I think the truth about it is kind of uncomfortable, and there's going to be a time of like adjustment. And so just knowing it's going to take a little bit of time for the kids to figure out, like, where do I fit in, and getting used to the process. And I think, too, realizing that feeling's not going to last forever and that there is help available, and just relying on their support network to kind of navigate that change too. So I think, because sometimes we want to kind of to alleviate that anxiety of saying like, oh, everything's just going to be perfect. I say, well, it is kind of hard sometimes to make that transition. So I think some things to be aware of for parents, that the change can be a little challenging, and for the students to know that too. I think sometimes we want to kind of have like, hey, everything's just going to be perfect, but the truth about it is change can be hard, but that feeling doesn't last forever, and that there is help available, and then they can rely on their support network to help navigate those changes. And I think oftentimes too, just understanding what the kids' concerns are and what can we do to work towards to, making that a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I appreciated what you said about networks, because I think that's big for parents at both these levels, of helping you, just reaching out to other parents you might know and using that network. One of the things when we have parents come in, especially if it's their first high schooler, we always say breathe. Like, just know like we've graduated thousands of kids and we're gonna help your student make it to the end, and that we have the resources to help them. And that can look like a lot of different things, from our counselors to using outside resources, our teachers, our administration staff, that we're gonna be there to support them through it.
What are some of the things that we do have in place? And you mentioned some of that with the counselors and different things, but I know there's also programs or other services available. But what are some of those things that we do have in the middle schools or the high schools that help them in that transition process?
Well, I think something that we have as part of our kind of district plan too, like the counselors go out to the 5th grade classrooms in the spring to talk about middle school and talk about tips for being successful, and try to help with that transition. And those elementary schools come to our middle school building and meet some of our staff and kind of learn more about what it means to be a middle school student and know that we care about them. We do have running start that happens before the school year starts that can be another good opportunity to get more comfortable in the building. And we also have a web program where we train 8th grade web leaders to help welcome the 6th grade students in and do an orientation with them. And then those 8th graders meet with those 6th graders about once a month throughout the school year during their advisory period and do activities. So it's kind of a mentoring that takes place.
Yeah, very good. Some of those same things in the high school.
Yeah, high school is similar in some ways. We do send counselors and students to have conversations with kids going into the school year. We invite the 8th graders up for a visit to check out our building, check out our different activities that we have going on. They have multiple opportunities to come to the building with our open house times, freshman orientations, those things. Like Running Start, we offer connections at the high school level, and each of our buildings has them a little bit different, but it's an opportunity for them to come in and actually earn high school credit before they even start high school, and just getting to know the building, getting to know a few teachers and some of their classmates. So lots of things. And then we do Link Crew at our buildings in the high school level to do that mentoring with our older students to our incoming freshmen.
And those have been incredible ways to be able to get those kids into the building.
Yeah.
When they're in the building, all the middle schools also have the teaming process. A little bit of information on that.
Yeah, something I think is often a concern, especially when we have some larger schools, that when we have the teaming process where there's 4 core teachers, that a group of about 100 students have those teachers. So it's like a little learning community within the larger school. So just knowing that, hey, there's somebody's looking out for my kid, and it's like a little family there. So I think that's a great opportunity for students to build that sense of belonging that's so important in middle school and adolescence. And it also gives teachers they have a time during the day that they collaborate with one another to talk about how are things going for certain students and what's going well, what could be improved. And they often are collaborating with us as counselors too, to say, hey, would you check in with so-and-so to see how are they like in school? Is there anything that would make it better? And just to have that supportive network.
Yeah, very good. So if a parent has a very significant or serious concern that their child just isn't developing the way they should, or there's some unique circumstances that causes them concern with anxiety or overly anxious, things like that, who should they reach out to? What should they do?
I think there's lots of resources in our schools and different people. You know, sometimes it's that adult that they're comfortable with. Maybe they've gotten to really know one of their teachers. So that is an option. They can reach out to the counselors. All of our students in our district have an assigned counselor at the different levels, whether it's by last name or by grade at some of our middle schools, where they can reach out and they can help them be a resource either to use services we have within the building or connect them with community services. We're very lucky to have the counseling that we have in our district on top of our social workers who can also provide some of those resources for us. So those are great ways to start those, and they can help gather a team in the building of teachers and admin if we need to work with their student.
Good. How about in middle school?
I would just kind of echo what Katie was saying, just using those same resources. I think sometimes, you know, maybe the first thing that we notice with a student might be like, hey, maybe they're not doing very well in a class. And sometimes maybe that first step is, hey, what's going on in the class, and reaching out to the teacher to kind of get their perspective too. But I think a lot of times the flexibility we have as counselors or administrators or social workers, that we can have some more of those in-depth conversations during the day to help kind of identify what those needs are and kind of work towards solving those challenges.
Yeah, I agree, and reaching out to counselors is a vital piece. They can be a great conduit into the classroom, or if it's academic based, touch base with the teacher. Such great things there. So any last thoughts on parents that may wonder about that transition, especially their first child, but any last words of advice that you'd have for those parents?
I think know that there's people to help. You're not alone, and everyone's goal is for your student to be successful. We want them to get to that finish line. Middle school is working to get them to high school to be as successful as possible and build those skills so that high school is great. And in high school, we're looking to be able to send them out into the world and be successful in whatever they choose to do.
I would say, just reiterating to parents too, just like the importance of routines and like kids getting enough sleep. There's an increased need for sleep for adolescents. And I think regular family meals too, just opportunities to connect. Things can get so busy, but if they know what to expect, and it's like, hey, this is a time I connect with my family in the midst of dealing with change, like adjusting to a new school. It's like, hey, I can count on my family to be there to have a meal and see how things are going. And I think too, that's something we kind of emphasize in our district too, is like having a growth mindset. Yeah. Like everything doesn't have to be perfect, you know, as kids are going through their education, that it's like, hey, we're always focused on growth. There's going to be difficulties that come up, but we can persevere through those things and grow as a person. I think that could be a good life lesson.
Yeah, very good. Well, we thank you, Alex and Katie, and for that information. And again, encourage parents that anytime you have any type of concern that way, reach out to the schools. We're there to help and assist, and there's so many resources we have beyond our school walls, but especially within our schools. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Just a reminder again, we thank Avera for their partnership with us with the Family Forum series. This month, as stated, it is about our middle and high school and the changes that they go through. But next month, we're going to talk about some of those opportunities that you will have during the summer programming. So things that your children can be involved with, or your kids can be involved with during the summer that will help them, and also resources that you may have. So again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to talking with you again next month.